Welcome, welcome. Appreciate everyone being here. And Kathryn, it's wonderful to have you with us here on Trainer Talk. So nice to see you. Even though we're in the same community, it's not very often that we actually
in the same room.
are in the same room. So it's an I we're used to kind of meeting in this sort of way, I guess, right?
Yeah, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for having me, Becca.
Yeah, so let me introduce you to the group. And so this is Kathryn Bruin. You probably all know her. She's been an EFT trainer for, a number of years now. She's not considered one of the new kids on the block anymore, right, Kathryn?
Yeah.
So great to have you here with us. And Kathryn is a trainer in San Diego, and where she has a practice and a clinic where you also supervise people and have employees there and have quite a large practice, and you do a lot of trainings around because we don't get the opportunity to train that much in San Diego. So like me, you do a lot of trainings out and about. So thank you so much for joining us on Trainer Talk and on this special topic about getting started. Because I know it's something that you've spent a lot of time thinking about and working on, and I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Becca. Yes, I'm a marriage and family therapist here, and I do a lot of child therapy and family sessions, and then also couple sessions. And first sessions, mastering them, starting them well, starting out is really one of my passions. I think that's probably where I've struggled the most in my EFT journey. So trying to figure out what those blocks are and some of the easiest ways over them really is a passion of mine.
Yeah. Yes. And me too, actually. We didn't used to teach much about assessment when I first came into EFT. About 15 or 20 years ago, we just didn't talk much about it. There was kind of this underlying assumption that we would know from our training how to do a couple assessment. And we're talking really about EFT with couples now. And, doing an assessment with a couple is really different than doing an assessment with an individual or with a family. And I really didn't know. I would just kind of start right into trying to work on the negative cycle and skip assessment altogether.
Right.
And my experience has been when I learned how to do a good assessment and I really do the assessment part, step 1 and step 2 of EFT, the assessment part, it makes a whole different trajectory on how EFT goes and how quickly we can work with process and, just how quickly people settle down. So I'm delighted that you've also made this really a study and, you've done trainings on it specifically. So get us started here with your thoughts on it.
Yeah, the way you say that, Becca, I had the image of someone walking into a field and not knowing where the landmines were, right? And if you don't know where they are, how could you not be freaked out in that process? Like, how wise is it not to have that assessment process in place? And yet I agree with you. I think in our EFT training, we're really focusing on the experiential part of the model because that's what we struggle to learn the most. And we understand that assessment is an essential part of stage 1. But because we don't talk about it much or teach on it specifically, we're assuming that everyone else has it from their grad programs or from other CEU events. But because we don't make that explicit, sometimes people think that that's simply not a part of the process. And so assessment just flies out the window. I think especially if you're coming from a systems background, my personal sense is that I love systems theory, but I think I think assessment is just a very neglected part of systems work. So if you're an MFT like me, you haven't had that emphasis on assessment that you would get in a clinical psychology program. Yeah. I think part of it is just being left out of the training. The other part of first sessions for me is, I think, just part of who I am, like being more introverted, building rapport with people is just the hardest part of the therapy process. And then also being someone who likes to be in control and very planned and very organized, that beginning part of the process can be so discombobulating because there's a lot happening. There's a lot of information. You need to get the lay of the landscape. And it takes a while to get that. And so how do you regulate yourself while you're starting to get a sense of the context? Once I've conceptualized the case, I'm off to the races. But before I've conceptualized the case, I'm anxious. And that's just part of,
Well, and also part of it is that here, if we're going to lead, it's a lead and follow process that we're involved in. But we really are taking the lead into the places that the couple doesn't know how and what to do. And if we don't know where the landmines are, it's not safe for us to lead anybody anywhere, right?
Right, like going too deeply, too fast, or focusing on the wrong thing that they're not necessarily aware that that's a problem, or they want to focus. We can very easily lose our alliance with folks. So I love your idea of the leading and the following, because this is a humanistic experiential model where we're not the expert. We're not coming in to analyze every piece of everything. We need to discover things with them, but at the same time, it's directive. And we're in charge of how this process unfolds. And so how do we get that exquisite balance, right, of leading and guiding without them feeling like it's too top-down, too heavy, and they're not able to say what they need to say?
So that's kind of one of the problems around the very first session when the couple comes in together, and we're trying to find a balance between making sure they feel, as Scott Woolley says it, like his goal for the first session is that if nothing else, they feel deeply understood when they left, each partner, right? But we also want to really assess as we go along. We're building, first part, of course, is alliance. And then part of that building alliance is making sure they're understood, and we can understand them if we don't get the assessment information that we need.
Right. So the way that I think about this metaphorically is every couple relationship's different, of course, but it's sort of like you have been dropped into the middle of a forest, and every relationship's its own forest, but you don't know where you're going to get dropped, right? You don't know what this couple's bringing in. Could be this side, could be that side. You have no idea until you've landed on the ground and you start exploring. And it simply is going to take time for you to get to know that whole terrain. You need to know the terrain, but you can't rush around it. You have to just start in one area and start cleaning up and exploring. And so what we do have, though, is some sort of a map. We know what we need to collect in this assessment process. And I think one of the first blocks I find is that people expect too much from themselves. You're not going to get all the information you need to in a first session. I think it's helpful to recognize that therapy is a 3-phase session. You've got early treatment, you've got middle treatment, and end-stage treatment. And I think of early treatment as at least 3 to 4 sessions, maybe even longer with a trauma couple.
Right.
But can I give myself at least 4 sessions to get my conceptualization, to have my assessment, fairly in place? And so giving yourself time, because again, you're going to be in that forest trying to figure out, okay, so where am I? They're escalated. They want to talk about this. What does this have to do with anything? But on that map, what I have is my alliance is most important. The attunement process is important. I do need to assess for contraindications. So there are 5 or 6 or 7 pieces of types of information that I want to get. But what order you collect those in doesn't really matter. It's sort of like having a treasure map, having or like a search and find. I've got 20 items I need to figure out, and I might discover item 5 first, and then 10, and then 15. But collect the information as it comes to you. And then occasionally zoom back and look at the list and see, oh, I haven't considered cultural factors. I haven't asked them about their sexuality. Oh, I haven't asked about addiction. And so at the end of session, go and revise that, see where the holes are, keep that in the back of your brain and find a way to bring that in. And as long as you've covered those areas within those first 3 to 4 sessions, I think we're doing fine.
Yeah, and that 3 to 4 sessions, that's exactly what I give myself as well. Actually 4 solid sessions. Usually within the 4th session, I'm starting to do process work, moving away from assessment and into process work somewhere during that 4th session. But I generally do, I don't know how you stack it. I mean, I kind of follow the protocol that's recommended in the book, which is both of them together, and then each an individual. and for that fourth session, bringing them back together. And that often it completes assessment and starts really the first phase, the first actual treatment session, even though we're treating as we go along because we're building alliance and we're getting the map, we're sharing what we know about the map, we're filling in the holes of context pieces that they may not have considered because we're viewing that from the attachment lens, and it's not something that couples come in looking at it from, including their childhood significant issues that they've had.
I agree with you. I think that protocol is important. Sue talks about doing, I think, 2 sessions together and then the individuals and then coming back. Whether you do that in the second and the third doesn't matter too much. I try to get a feel with the clients because we also know that alliance focuses on the task aspect of therapy. Because we need to focus on what the clients want to focus on in order to build that strong alliance. So if I've got the sense that those individual sessions too early are going to make them frustrated, that we aren't getting to the heart of the matter, then I might wait until the third session to do it. But you've got to get a feel from the clients on that. So I try to hold that.
That's such a good, important thing to amplify because we do have in our EFT research specifically, about alliance, that the thing that matters most is that task aspect. Are we doing with them what they think is really important? And so if it's just our agenda, like I need to get this history from you I need to know, what hurts you had in your childhood so I can kind of see, are you more anxious or more avoidant? And I have my agenda up and running full like that. That may not meeting their immediate task. I might have to introduce why I want to do some of those things, but I have to make sure that we have alignment there with those task elements.
I think that's key because that research shows that by the end of the third session, if you've got a strong alliance with each of them, that really determines your prognosis and treatment as opposed to like initial distress level. But I want to come back to what you said because I learned that from Scott Woolley as well. If that's your number one guiding principle, the first thing on your map, if you can just leave that first session and every session with each of those people feeling deeply heard and understood and seen, they're going to be coming back and your alliance is going to be a strong.
And then you can take longer to get those pieces of the map that will help you go deeper into the forest and help them come out more secure, right?
They'll follow you into all the nooks and crannies as long as they feel deeply heard and understood around what they want to feel deeply heard and understood about. And that doesn't mean to say that you're spending 30 sessions with one and 30 minutes with one and 30 with the other.
Right.
Withdrawers have often less of a need to say much. It's you have to attune to each person and figure out who is this person and what do they need in this session to start to feel safe and secure with me. Can I figure that out and give them that in each session? And that's what builds that strong foundation to go forward from.
Yeah, so, Kathryn, there's a question here from Betsy. And would like to ask you, what could you say more about how you decide whether to have 1 or 2 sessions before the individual sessions? Great question.
Oh, that's a great question. Honestly, my bias, just getting very open and honest, would be to do 2 sessions. Because people are usually in a rush to come into couples therapy. By the time they come in, they're fairly desperate. They both want to feel heard and understood, and they want to get the sense that things are rolling, right? Therapy costs a lot of money, and they don't want to be here for longer than necessary. And so I feel like most of the time they don't see the value in the individual session. It feels like it's stalling the process. And so if I can have 2 sessions with them as a couple to really just give them a sense of how I work and show them a sense of step 2 so that they go home and they have something tangible to start to look for. I have their buy-in to then say, hey, I need the next 2 sessions to be individual ones. So I'm not seeing you as a couple for the next 3 weeks. Like that's a long break to take before you have that alliance in place. So the only time that I'm going to fast forward and do those individual sessions sooner is if there's a contraindication that I'm concerned about, and that's usually going to be around domestic violence that I need to assess, or an ongoing affair. Even with addiction, I might wait a little longer. It would have to be something that's really breaching the safety that tells me that it's not safe to have one more couple session before I assess pieces more deeply.
That's such a great answer. I love how you laid that out. So there is that way that it really makes sense to do the step 2. One of the things that comes up with me as you say that, because there's 2 things. One is that these days, and for the last several years, probably 4 or 5 years, I've only done, not only, but almost exclusively, like 90% of the time, what I'm doing is intensives, right? And so that makes it lays it out a little bit different. I have a little bit longer first session, and then do the individual session. I always think of it as a first session, but actually it'd probably be more of the equivalent of 2 sessions. Not actually, because I don't go 3 hours without breaking ever. But there is something about, and then there is also something for me about the alliance development, and I think this is probably just maybe my own shyness or my own awkwardness in meeting the couple, to get into those individual sessions and to feel that alliance, and I get them, I start to understand where they're coming from, the attachment framework, that for me, I really prefer to do the individual sessions before I start step 2, before I start to try to see the cycle, because if I can really understand where they're coming from, and this speaks to me as more of a withdrawer actually, right? I kind of want to know the pieces, so as I can make a good guesstimation about what position of the cycle they're in when I go to start to do cycle assessment. Then I can frame and hold each one and their reactivity as I'm doing the cycle assessment. I can kind of go in with, I can see why this person would be the pursuer, this person would be the withdrawer. I gather most of that from that individual session. So that's interesting, right? These 2 kind of ways to lean on when you do the individual session.
I love this discussion, Becca. I love chatting with you, and thank you so much for sharing that piece, because I think that is why this stuff is difficult, is because we're all different and there's no one prototypical couple. And so there's not a prototypical way to do humanistic experiential work. This process gives you the general roadmap, but how you get there and go about and which pathway you take doesn't really matter. It does matter that it fits for you as a clinician.
Right.
And so there you figured out a way that fits for you as a person, that gets you more comfortable and you working in the best way that you can. And every one of us is going to be a little different. And so that makes it really hard to train in this, because there's not a systematic way to go about this.
There's not. And it's one of the delightful things about EFT that's also very frightening, and when you're first learning it, is that we're using ourselves as the main tool. And so the sooner I feel confident and strong and aligned with each person, and that I can actually deeply understand them, instead of trying to guess who they are. The safer.
Right. And that is key to me in this early phase treatment, is the idea that what the therapist needs matters too. Fancy that. This is not just about the clients. We're also important in the room. Like you said, we're a person there and we have longings and needs. And so as much as the couple is interviewing you to see if you're a good fit, you're also interviewing this couple and getting a lay of the land and figuring out in early phase treatment, is this a treatment goal that I can adhere to? Can I work well with this couple, or are there interesting cultural pieces or contraindications here that don't make me the best fit? I'm interviewing them to see if I can do my work well, because I like, being effective.
Right. So maybe I can work with them. Right? Because maybe one of us has a background that says, oh, you have some addiction? That's okay. I can handle that. Or, oh, you have an open relationship, or like there's a background of an affair, or whatever they bring that we just have to go. Do I have a background that supports me continue doing that with them, right? And can I get support for that?
I'm going through some personal healing work of my own, like with couples who've recently lost a baby. Like that is just so raw and just not something that I want to feel at the moment. And so I might just say, hey, I'm not the best fit for you. And I just think that's so empowering to know that it's okay to think about yourself as well.
Right. Well, I mean, because we know it's on us to lead them through this process, like you said, to have the map and help them get through the woods and go explore the nooks and crannies. And we've got to kind of feel our best selves and feel secure in what we're doing, right? So that someone asked also, Leilani asked if it's okay to have the individual sessions in the same week. That's okay. That's how I always do it, actually. If I can schedule it, possibly, that's one way that I address that sense that Kathryn was talking about, like, so that it's not 3 weeks away, when they're trying to get going, is that I do schedule the individual sessions in the same week. So it's only 1 week in between getting back to the couple. Yeah. So that's one way to address that. And other people do it that differently, right? So again, there's that room that we bring ourselves, our schedule, how it works in our practice, or maybe in the company that we're working for, what is required there. So there's lots of flexibility for that. Again, it's the alliance and then these key pieces of information that we need to have before we can start really a lot of present process work, or be careful not to go too deep too fast, because that can get us into the weeds, that blow up one of those landmines that we didn't anticipate, right? So there's lots of room for some flexibility around that, but there are these guiding principles, which is really nice.
So I think what you're saying there again is just that tricky part is the balance of how to not get too deep, but how to start focusing on the process and give couples something to walk away with by the end of the session. But at the same time, knowing that if you go too deep, you could blow up a landmine because you haven't assessed clearly. Like, how do you gauge the depth? Like, how do you balance all of these pieces, right?
Right.
That's a tricky piece.
That is a tricky piece. And that's one of the things that assessment helps out so much, right? So Betsy asked this question about, do you try to include enactments in the first session? And so my response to that is yes, but it's in an assessment way, because we can use enactments for assessment. We can use enactments to try to show the negative cycle. We can use enactments to try to create bonding moments. So it all depends, right, on that we're intentional about how we do it, what we're doing. And I want to hear from you, Kathryn, about enactments in the first session, because I have a particular enactment that I really love to do in the first session, but I want you to share what you do first.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I love that question. Thanks, Betsy. And I think you most certainly want to bring enactments into your work, and at least within the first couple sessions. But like Becca said, one of those is a diagnostic enactment. And so what I'm most curious about, you see, people are coming in and they might be securely attached, they might be anxiously or avoidantly attached. People who are securely attached are going to be presenting very clearly, very coherently, and in a very organized way that you can take their content and you can file it away as truth, right? But if someone's anxiously attached, they're going to be feeling a lot, they might be talking a lot, and their information might not be completely accurate. And then of course, if you're avoidantly attached, you're not going to be offering much at all and following more of the nonverbal. So what I'm trying to say is that when people give you content, if you start following the content and building your conceptualization of content, I think you can get on the wrong pathway because it's not completely accurate. And so as much as we need to listen to content and use that as an opportunity to reflect, because that's what builds alliance. When you reflect what people say, they feel heard and understood. So you're naturally building your alliance. But you also want to change your lens, start focusing on the process, because the process is actually going to tell you a lot more accurately what the dynamic is in this relationship, right? Like if you just say to someone, tell me what your attachment style is, they could tell you anything from an intellectual place, but what's more important is when they're in a place of dysregulation, how does it show up in the room? That's really going to speak for itself. So the question is, how do we get the couple to show us what happens in their dynamic? Because I'm going to take that to be the truth. So having each person, so what I'm trying to assess is, where is this couple? Is one of them secure? Are they secure? Are they anxious? Are they avoidant? If you can have one of them turn to the other and show you whether they can reach with something vulnerable in a clear, coherent way, that's going to tell me a lot. Maybe one of them can do that, and then the other person isn't accessible. Maybe the other person is accessible. Maybe neither of them can risk and reach. Maybe neither of them can go there at all. But having them actually do that in front of you tells me most of what I need to know.
Right. That's right. So
that's why
that's
those enactments are so powerful.
Yes. So you said a lot, and I just want to slow down and repeat, or have you repeat that part about we're using enactments for part of the assessment. And it depends a little bit on where the couple comes in initially. Like we're assessing right away, even without doing like assessment questions, by how they present. And we're trying to get that flavor of how they present. And they're going to start on the surface with content. They are. And so we're starting to listen, right? And that's going to give us some of the task elements. I mean, we've also done some paperwork before then that we've established some initial alliance and understanding about what's going to happen in the first few sessions, because we're going, probably, at least those of us in America, going through some sort of informed consent process, right? Some of us may have had them do questionnaires even before they enter, but here we are in this first session, and they're doing a lot of content. We're starting to reflect process, we're starting to reflect emotion, we're continuing to organize it through that focus. And there may be moments then that we have them turn and see, right, that we see what happens. And you described like this reach for, right? So is there any part of that, Kathryn, that you want to just say again to, nobody's asking any questions, so I guess maybe it came through really clear. I got maybe a little bit distracted and lost. So, but is there any part of that first session with enactments or first session?
Yeah, I like to think of myself as I'm a process consultant. I'm there to help you have the conversation that the two of you have struggled to have, right? Securely attached couples can have conversations about anything and be exquisite problem solvers and be very creative. So if you're coming to see me, you're not able to have the important conversations, and I want to understand what gets in the way. And so the best way for me to see that firsthand instead of hear about it from their recall is to have them have an important conversation in front of me. They're both there with this content, right? They are struggling, and they've conceptualized it in ways that are probably different from each other and also different from what I see to be the problem, right? I know that the problem here is probably lack of emotional security with each other, but they've conceptualized it as anything else.
Right.
And so trying to come in and meet them where they are and have them talk about what they see as problematic, and then turn and talk with each other about it, is going to trigger the cycle. And the cycle is then going to give me a way to start focusing on the process and figuring out the different elements of the cycle, and also see firsthand what their coping strategies are. Because when there's a threat in the room and they're in distress, coping strategies are going to be present, because you're seeing the attachment process lay out, and that gives me a lot of what I need to know and follow.
So one of the things that you're saying is that, and that I want to make a distinction about, is that you're starting to talk about cycle assessment versus general couple assessment, right? And there's a distinction between who they are, why they're here, their couple story, how they got in this quagmire, what they want from you, right?
Yeah.
That's a bit different than what is actually the process that's going on between the two of you.
Right.
And so when it comes to first enactments, and we just go back to that, one of the things that I do around understanding the couple and the task elements of what the couple wants is to understand their story, not in content. I mean, content is all right, but that's not the main show in town. It's the emotional elements of their story.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I love to ask couples is, and if any one of you have seen my live demonstration sessions, I often start this way. It's just the same way that I do in my office, which is, when is the moment that you knew this was your person? Can you share that with me? And it gives me all kinds of information. One, can they even remember it?
Yes,
Are they even willing to try to remember it? Did they have a moment or not? Was it accumulation of moments? Did they just slip into this relationship without an active decision? It tells me so many things.
Yeah.
Most couples have a moment, and and it tells you how generally distressed they are, whether they can bring it up and land on it at all. Well, or how much they've recreated that story, because we know that people will redo their history, right? They'll take a positive thing and they'll color it negative when distress has been long and hard for a long time. So I'm kind of listening and watching for that. But generally, I can encourage them enough and hang out on that question long enough to get something about that was meaningful to them about their partner. Maybe the thing and it's often the thing that they feel like they lost, right? Now, it's part of what adds to the distress. I try to do a first enactment with that story, with that. Did you think your partner ever really knew that this was the moment, that them being there for you when this or that happened, or their response to you when this or that happened, that's really what said you're my person? Do you think they know that? I try to do that as a first enactment. What I find that it does is then I can see, can they do that reach? Does the partner go, oh, I knew that, I don't want to hear it again? Or how does the part you can see, do they reach? Do they respond? Do they respond for a moment and then go away?
Right.
Does the emotional tone change? It gives you so much information, emotional information. And the other thing that I think it gives me is permission to use language like this is your person, to keep the attachment significance of their relationship up and running.
That's very powerful. I remember that intervention from John Gottman as an assessment tool, and I think that does give you a wealth of information like you've just listed, and you're really looking for those nonverbals to see, can they go back and experience positive emotion in this relationship or not to mention the longings and the language, but also giving that couple possibly a positive experience in your session, which is going to keep them coming back because you're tapping into something of worth that they want more of. And of course, that's possible with some couples. With more escalated couples, you can't even go there. So I love that intervention. It's not possible with everyone.
So now I'm embarrassed that it's a John Gottman intervention.
Oh, yeah.
Because I've forgotten that. I did lots of training with John Gottman before I started training with Sue. And I think I actually saw someone else do it. I thought, oh, I like that question so much.
Really?
I'd forgotten all about it being a guy. So now I'm embarrassed. So.
Well, that's not embarrassing. I mean, he's a wonderful researcher and we get so much from him, right?
He doesn't do it for the same. He doesn't do it for the same attachment significance, I guess.
I think you get a lot more out of it. What I remember from his work is it was ready to see if the couple could get back to that coherent narrative, or is there any shared joy Or is there
Right.
just that disgust and contempt that comes up, right? But you've
Yeah,
obviously
that's
already
right.
milked it. So you have EFT'd it.
I've EFT'd it, that's for sure. So the question was, what it was, can you remember the moment when you decided? Basically, because they decide to do life together at some point, right?
Yeah, I love
And is
that.
there a moment, Oprah was
Right,
asking what the question
right.
was.
So that leads you then nicely also into that bird's eye view process of when
Yeah,
was that, and then when did you guys lose that? Have you ever had secure attachment, which
exactly.
means you can then define what that is and how they would know if they had that? Or when did they lose that? Were they never able to build that? I mean, you could just go so many places from that, right?
So much how has it changed? When did it change? How did it change? It gives you early echoes of if there's an attachment injury or not. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So as an assessment tool, it opens lots of doors that we can then choose which handle to walk in or which doorknobs to kind of come back to, right?
I love that idea of, is this your person? Because that could also lead into the assessment question of, do you want this to be your person? Like, are
Yes.
we working with a primary attachment here or not? Because that's what we do in EFT. So it's important to figure out that early. And if it's not your person anymore, how resentful are you of that process? And with really escalated couples, I've got a new assessment question that I think I came up with. You can tell me. So just having had so many angry people in my office, I started asking them, do you feel like you have the right to punish your partner?
Ah, that's a great
Isn't that a good
question.
one? And I'm telling you, because the people that are that escalated, they're holding on to that, man. There's like
That
serious
resentment
resentment, and they
inside.
feel like that is justified, and we
Yeah,
might as well get that clear, because when there's punishment going on intentionally, like, it's just so hard to build safety, right, with those folks. I'd rather know that ahead of time.
that is such a great
Yeah,
question,
I
right?
know. I
Yeah.
really like it.
And also they may tell you, well, I do have a lot of resentment or anger, but and they may, may also give you some view of self or view of other. Like I don't like that I do that, or I only do it
Yeah,
because,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
just
yeah. Exactly. How bad do they feel about it? Or that will
yeah,
tell you how quickly to do an individual session to
right.
further explore that.
Okay, so there's a question here from Pippa who says one of the pressures felt in the first session is not being able to get the cycle in the first or second session, and so what, and then you said you'd love some encouragement about that. So the encouragement I would give you is, I don't try to get the cycle in the first session. I don't even try. You don't, use like not enough information to get the cycle. That's step two, right? I don't even try it. I'm getting information that kind of gives me a working hypothesis, right? The assessment, the task elements, the pieces that that we want to understand around their attachment, their sexuality, um, the contraindications, or at least the what would now call the contraindications for stage two work. Like really what's happening there. What do we need to get from the individual sessions? Those elements that we need to know about their story are. I'm just myself looking for developing a bit of a working hypothesis so that when I start to lead into cycle assessment, I feel like I've got a pretty good lay of the land, and now I'm just pulling in the elements and having them discover, and us discover together what that negative cycle is. So that's probably the third or fourth session before I'm really doing that, right? If the two individual, you may do that a little bit sooner if you're doing the couple session two in a row before the individuals. I'm not sure, but I don't actually try to do the cycle assessment till I've completed the individual sessions, however long, how many, if I need to do two couple sessions beforehand because they're so escalated, you're
Mm-hmm.
just stopping the crisis. You can't really do much assessment. You're just in crisis management.
Mm-hmm.
There's some room for some flexibility around that. So I'd say to Pippa, don't, no pressure about trying to get the cycle in the first session. It's way too hard and fast. What would you say, Kathryn?
I want to say, Pippa, it's great to have you on the show. I think this is
Oh,
Pippa from South
yes, hello.
Africa.
Right.
Pippa's from South Africa, and I think, and I know the couples she works with are just so many traumatized couples, just really hard. I think this is why the conversation is so valuable to me, Becca, because we're both EFT trainers, but we might work in some different ways, and so it's
Yeah.
conversing like this that helps us grow. So I'm so fascinated in your way of doing that. I feel like the cycle is always present because that's why they're
Yes.
coming in. It just shows
Right.
up in different ways, sometimes more escalated, sometimes really withdrawn. And I find myself really drawn and fascinated by that cycle. And so I feel like I'm interacting with it right from the start. And so I feel like with less escalated couples, I can have at least the elements of their cycle down by the end of a first session. If I'm working with a trauma couple, man, it's taking me 6 to 8 sessions just to understand all the nuances because they're pulling away and they're pushing forward and they're doing both and they're denying it, right? It takes a really long time to get the lay of the land. And with trauma couples, at some point I'm thinking, hey, I'm never going to have your full cycle down, and that's not really what matters so much, and kind of letting go of that. But I do, for me, that's really interesting. Like I start that first session with the paperwork, and then I pretty quickly get into the content of what brings them in. And as they're giving me the content, I'm starting to lay out the process immediately. And so as I'm doing that cycle questioning and what do you do, and then what do you think, and how does that feel, and then how do you guys talk about this, I'm starting to collect all my assessment information and my assessment questions, and I'm peppering questions in as we go, but I'm always trying to have the cycle front and center so that by the end of that first session, I start to have that sense of that initial hypothesis, and I can do some sort of a summary and send them away with something tangible. So I feel like they got something out of the first session. But maybe we're just defining that a little differently. Like you're not going to have the full cycle, but you're going to start to ask about it.
Oh, yeah, certainly. The, elements of it, what triggers them, I mean, I'm also trying to get so yeah, it's great to kind of wonder about what are we
Right?
doing a bit differently and what's that about? Because I think a little bit more, um, a little more compartmentally, like I already said, like I'm the withdrawer as the therapist, so I'm thinking step one, alliance and assessment. Step two, cycle assessment. They don't bleed quite as much together for me. And yes, I am certainly seeing it. I see it immediately.
Yeah.
I see it immediately. But I also feel like I want to be asking them questions about their history and where they came from and their attachment significance, and getting those essential elements from them and starting to link them in to what I'm seeing and more broadly. And then when I actually, so they're all elements, like components of the cycle. I'm always seeing the cycle. But as far as having it emerge for them, like the
Yeah.
cycle assessment for me is when we start to put the pieces, organize the elements and the pieces, and I don't try to do that in step one at all, in the first session
Session one.
at
Oh, that's so
all.
interesting. Yeah.
What I do want them to leave with something, and that big something is that an agreement, that what we're going to work on is that that I may need some more information, but I have enough information to have a sense that, like, this is what I think we're going to be working on, whether that's, attachment insecurity, I mean, for me, it's always around attachment insecurity, but how I'm going to frame that to
For
them
them,
to
right.
get that working agreement is
Yeah.
what I want them to leave with, is that I have
Yeah.
hope that we have a working agreement or close to developing one, even if it's just that the next few sessions I'm going to fill in these gaps.
Gaps. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
And that's what I want them to take away with it. I have some sense of
yeah,
hope that
yeah.
if I'm not going to work with them, that I'm going to figure out who would be excellent for them,
Mm-hmm.
and that that I have hope that the process can be helpful for them.
Mm-hmm. That's
Yeah.
really interesting. I want to talk with you more
So,
about this.
yeah, so that's really interesting, right? Because I don't actually even attempt to like organize it in a way that they
So
would go, this is our cycle
I think
until.
if I had to quantify it, I'd probably spend at least 10 or 15 minutes in a first session starting to track the cycle. And then from that, because I feel like that gives them a sense of the way that I'm going to be working and what they're signing up for. And then I'll zoom out from the cycle and say, okay, so clearly this is the pattern that gets going. This is what we're going to be working on understanding more of. And then I'll zoom out and say, how long has this pattern been around? And then I'll go into the history and I'll start building out the context around
Ah,
that cycle
right.
piece.
Oh, that's really
And then
interesting.
I'll send them away at the end of the session with, well, here are the strengths, here's the hope I have,
Yeah.
here's the cyclical piece that I think you're struggling with, and go home this week and watch for this one piece. So I guess my curiosity is, when you have already escalated couple, how do you stay out of starting to process that step 2 piece?
Um, I'm not trying to organize it so much with them. I'm trying to be there, be present, hear them, make sure that the partner isn't lost when I'm hearing one that's, flooding or something like that. I'm going to frame the work of, like obvious. I'm just going to try to get that deep understanding more than have them see any pattern. So actually
Yeah,
much more,
it's
leaning into the emotion. So what I think is so cool, especially for people, for our group here watching, is that we're coming at this differently. You
mhm,
know, I um, We're coming at it differently. So if you're someone who says, "Wow, it really feels good to me to put the elements together and then go get history after I have the what's happening in the present process," like do that. And if you're someone more like me who says, "No, I really want to have some of the history and those elements that kind of make the case, so it will be easy for them to digest the negative cycle,"
mhm,
then try that. Try taking the pressure off yourself to know the cycle, know the positions of the cycle, know who's who in the cycle. Like for me, that's just a lot to do in the first session. I don't even try to do it.
yeah, yeah.
The
Yeah,
other thing that I
experiment
found
and
really
figure out your way.
helpful, yeah, it's good to experiment with that, right? And I think I started out doing step 2 and no assessment,
Mm-hmm.
and I felt that pressure. And
Mm-hmm.
after kind of a couple of years of doing it that way, I went, wow, I'm really missing the whole assessment thing. And so I'm like, wow, assessment, this is awesome. This
Yeah,
is
yeah,
so
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
All
I
this
get you.
room to figure things out, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Love it so much. And my experience is it's actually helps when I start to do process work in the cycle present and be much more on the tango present process, that I don't have as much trouble with content trying to come in all the time, because they've really spent a long time telling me about their story and telling me where they came from and helping me see who they are outside of that negative cycle. And I've just found it much easier to keep content out of the room
What
after.
once you've got that alliance up and running, once they're safe, they're far more open, and then you can get deeper places more quickly, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's really interesting, very cool. And I'd
Yeah,
love to,
yeah, yeah.
that's probably why you're a tango dancer and I'm like, not.
That's
I'm
funny.
like going to be on the marching band doing like this. Right?
That's hilarious. We all have our own rhythm, man. As long as we know what it is.
I know, that's right. So that's pretty fun. Let's see. So there's one more question that just has come up about. Hopefully that was helpful, Pippa, to you and to other people, and not just confusing, right? So how do we assess if they are engaged. What do we do different for assessment? Is that the question, Cecilia? How do you assess that they are engaged?
Engaged in the process.
Engage with each other, I think, perhaps, like if they're not in a necessarily committed relationship. Is that what you're asking, Cecilia? We'll see.
I mean, in the meantime, I can just chat about that and you can clarify the question, Becca. But yeah, I think we get people in so many different places that, again, you're dropped into the middle of the forest. You've got to figure out where you are. This could be a couple coming in because they know exactly what EFT is and they're signing up for that. And you don't really have to engage them in the EFT process because they're already educated. It could be a couple coming in with no idea, asking for coping tools, and you have to sell them on what EFT is, right? And then they could come in ambivalent with themselves, with the relational process, or I guess the number one question that I use to assess that is Sue's question on how hopeful are you that given good therapy, and I know what I'm doing, that you guys could actually recover. How hopeful are you from 0 to 10? That's research we have in terms of heterosexual couples, and we're looking to see what the female partner's level of hopefulness is because they tend to be pursuers. And if the pursuer is engaged, she's going to make sure that withdrawer shows up. And the longer you have them in session, the more likelihood that you can help them heal, right? But that gives me a very quick in the moment sense of how motivated or how big is the longing here to help this process change.
That's right. We make the assumption they're here because they want to do something, or the both of them wouldn't show up together. But we are trying to assess that, how much hopefulness there is, how much discouragement, how much hurt. And, when you have an engaged couple, they're trying to build trust. They're trying to know each other, build trust, get emotionally connected, because out of those components, commitment develops, right? So knowing, trusting, being emotionally connected, having loyalty, those are things that really help foster commitment, and especially when couples are wondering about should they get engaged or not. So there's lots of research around what helps engaged couples in particular, and we're overlaying that into the EFT process where we're going to help them. What are the blocks to emotional connection, and what's insecure, what makes it difficult for them to trust and rely on each other, right? So we know, are they here wanting, and that's what they're wanting to do, then we can help them with that.
Can I give you I know we're almost out of time, but I just want to say what my favorite assessment question is at the moment.
Yes.
Is, are they engaged? What are they engaged for? What is your idea of closeness? These are two different human beings, and there's so many ways to be in a relationship. Again, do you want to be in a primary relationship with each other? And if so, what does that mean to you? What does closeness mean to each of you? For some people, it's sitting alongside each other watching a TV show. For others, it's like the 2-minute stare in the eyes. But understanding what they're engaged for, I think, is crucial, because that is a whole aha moment of, oh my gosh, we define closeness differently. And that's probably been a whole lot of reason for why we're having a tough time, just not understanding that.
Yeah. If we think about ARE, accessibility, responsiveness, and engagement, we can really use those things to assess. It's also a great instrument, the brief ARE, which I think is available at the TriEFT website for those of you who are looking for assessment forms. But those concepts around engagement, accessibility, and reliability are really wonderful things that help people, feel more emotionally close, develop trust, and for those engaged couples. And as you're getting the meaning making, they're starting to know each other more and more, which makes it more predictable and reliable, which we know builds secure attachment. Right.
We do often ask folks to go home and start reading Hold Me Tight, and this ARE form questionnaire that Becca helped develop the whole Hold Me Tight program. It's at the end of the first homework chapter of Hold Me Tight. So the first chapter where the couple actually reads the chapter and then they do a homework assignment is the ARE. So you could actually just assign that after one of the first sessions.
Yeah, it's great to get them back into that literature around attachment and looking at cycles and couples and that sort of thing. That's really wonderful. Okay, we just have a couple more minutes. I see this question from Maya, which we can probably answer fairly quickly, and then we'll wrap up. And she's asking, with what less escalated couples, do we ever do psycho-ed about attachment, like showing the cycle diagram or give them an idea about where they're going in the first session? So, do you want to take that first, Kathryn?
Yeah, that's a lovely question. Thank you, Maya. Certainly in Southern California, our ethics code requires us to explain to people what they're signing up for. So I think that's really
Absolutely.
important. Again, if couples are coming in knowing what EFT is, then that's already done. If they don't, I want to give them a handout on what EFT is so they know what they're signing up for. But I do think that I said you need that little map. You need those, the search and find tools. One of those is just being able to say in a minute, like your elevator pitch on what EFT
Yes.
is. And so I don't really, it is psycho ed. There are moments when I'm zooming out and I'm giving a summary and maybe I've just shown them that they have a negative cycle. I will then just sit back and say, this is exactly what I want to help you with. What I'm trained to do is to help the two of you have a secure attachment. Here's how you know if you have a secure attachment, and I'll explain ARE. And couples who don't have a secure attachment get into these dynamics where these defenses come up instead of being vulnerable. So I always backtrack and do a little bit of education. It's not my style to go to a drawing board and draw it out. But I definitely want to have the verbal ability to give that to them just in 30 seconds.
And then we might give that to them as homework, right? Either like the Hold Me Tight book or particular homework or handouts or additional assessment. Like the assessment questions themselves are a great way to orient people to how we work, right? So lovely. I hope that answered that question. And I too, I mean, maybe twice in my career have I done the cycle diagram, didn't work. There was like, oh, okay, good. And then the cycle was, right back in the room. It didn't help at all.
I think that could be helpful with someone who's an engineer, that in order to buy into the process, they need to understand cognitively what you're wanting. So I would do that for them just as a way to build alliance. That's probably the only time.
Right. Maybe at some times. And I'll actually say that for the most part, I really focus on the process of emotion now and how the danger signals create the block. And I don't really think about the negative cycle in the way that, I mean, I do think about it as an infinity sign, but it's much more the process of emotion on each side of that rather than the unmet need and the primary emotion, right? So I maybe have tried it historically, but I don't use that anymore. And so, Pippa, we could ask Sue to change. She talks much more now about 20 sessions instead of 10 sessions, right, Kathryn? So no pressure. And it does so depend on we're a certain important part of the factor in our learning process. But being with people, understanding them is hugely important for them to come back, and we get more time as we're learning in that environment where they can really fill us with them. And that's the first thing that really matters, is that alliance. And Sue now does speak much more about 20 sessions. I will say that when you're working with a less escalated population, like I worked for about four years or so in a university counseling center. It was a religious university. And the couples would come in after the first fight.
Nice.
And it was routine. I mean, I could actually do all of EFT in 6 to 8 sessions, right? Because there was no rigid negative cycle.
Yeah.
But that's not the case anymore. 20 or 30 sessions, and then sometimes 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years, can take couples. So really wonderful to have you on, Kathryn. It's been so fun to talk to you and to, have you with us in this environment. So thank you for being here. And thank everyone who's been here with us too and asking questions. It's been fun for you and I, Kathryn, I think, to have the interchange and to have the questions coming in to see people's responsiveness.
Thank you for having me, Becca. Thank you, everybody.
Kathryn, do you want to say where people can find you?
Oh, sure. My website is kathryndebrain.com, and you're welcome to contact me there with any questions. I'd love to get to know you, so feel free to reach out.
Yep. And you're available for supervision, consultation, as well as being brought into areas for master classes and training events. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining us. Bye now.
Bye.